Welcome into episode 395 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Bridget and Scott, the Bruins were vastly outplayed against the Colorado Avalanche for the majority of regulation, but a strong third period, in particular, a strong first 5 minutes of the third period, was all Boston really needed to have David Pastrnak and Morgan Geekie connect a few times, and the Bruins got a 3-1 win over the Colorado Avalanche. So here we are. Let's break it all down.
I'll go first, I guess, because this is like the lead star of the game. Morgan Geekie had 2 goals. He had the 2 and then the 2 real goals, I'm going to call it that. And then Pasta had an empty netter at the end to seal the win. So, but Morgan Geekie just continues to be on a roll, 3 games in a row with goals. This was, obviously his best night in terms of production in that streak because he scored twice. And him and Pastrnak just continue to have this chemistry, find each other down low. They're getting some chances in really close too, like doorstep tap-ins and good seam passes across the top of the crease or low slot. And they're seeing each other. They know where each other is on the ice, and they're both such good athletes at executing the passes that it always seems to find where it needs to go, tape to tape, and then go into the back of the net recently. So Morgan Geekie has been playing really well, and this because we have so much crossover with like Bruins people, Bruins media, college media. I was just broadcasting a college hockey game this weekend, and before the game, one of the writers, Mark Dibber, who normally, if we've had him on the podcast before, he comes to some of the Bruins game. He covers a lot of college hockey too. He was like, are they going to sell high on Morgan Geekie? Are they like, is this what's going on here? Is he just raised his trade value so much? Which we talked about a little bit last episode. Like, are you selling high on him? Are you keeping him with Pasta because that's really working? And I don't know. I have opinions about it, but that's for later, not for the opening shifts. So let's toss it to Brian.
Yeah, and I have opinions on it as well, Bridget, and lots to talk about there. So, but for now, my opening shift is the other individual you mentioned, which is David Pastrnak. I think heading into January, I want to say he was on pace for 72 to 75 points or something like that. So still a very strong season for your average NHLer, but not for David Pastrnak, right? And this would still be leading the team in scoring, but as I mentioned, the bar is different for different players. Well, now David Pastrnak is on pace for 95 points this year. So still a 15-point drop-off, 15-plus point drop-off from his 2022-23 and 23-24 production, but he's a hell of a lot closer to that than he was prior to January. And, I mean, where would this team be without him? I mean, the same could be said last season, but quietly he is just, he's not going to win an MVP. I don't think. Certainly not. But like, if you're talking if you're measuring truly who an MVP is on what they mean to their team, you would find it would be a tough time to find somebody else that is as much their team this year as Pastrnak has. When you consider that, even given the fact he's 9th in the league in scoring, this Bruins team is still, clawing for their playoff lives. So I want to say, just to get the specifics here, I think he's on pace for 24 goals. I'm sorry, no, he has 24 goals, 35 assists, 59 points, and he's on pace for 95 points. So just to reiterate my point. But yeah, what a month for him, and the Bruins hope that continues.
Yeah, he got off to too slow of a start to really be like a serious MVP candidate. But yeah, obviously, like if he had been playing at this level all year, or even something close to it, because he's not going to be 2 points a game all season, but yeah, I mean, he would be right up there, and like he still might force his way into getting votes. So my opening shift is the rare non-Bruins opening shift. Bridget is typing something about my audio, so I apologize if my audio is off. I didn't catch that earlier. So, anyways, now you're throwing me off. Sorry.
No, you're a little muffly, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I said that if BC swept BU, we were never going to talk about it again. BC did sweep BU, but I do need to talk about it because Saturday night I saw something that I've never seen at a hockey game before, and that was a game-opening power play for Boston College as the result of a protocol violation at the start of warmups. What happened is BU's goalie, Mikhail Yegorov, a freshman making his NCAA debut. The kid had been playing in the USHL for the Omaha Lancers. BU brought him in for the second semester. So this is his first ever game, and it's at BC in front of a sold-out Connie Forum. And he went out on the ice too early for warm-ups. It is a rule in college, not the NHL, that no player can be on the ice before the officials. And Yegorov was. So technically, by the rule book, it's a penalty. But it just created this absolutely bizarre scene where not only does Yegorov go out, but then the staff, like whoever's in charge of the door, closes it behind him. And what I was told is that he tells the rest of the BU team that they can't go out yet. But BU's goalie was already on the ice skating around. So now he's just like stranded out there for 5 minutes, getting mercilessly booed by BC fans. BU's head coach, Jay Pandolfo, was understandably extremely displeased after the game about this whole situation, said, like, why was the door even open? You know, like, players don't run the door. So, like, why was the door even open if he wasn't allowed out yet? And, you know, basically, like, ultimately what Pandolfo said is kind of what my take on it is like, this is really how we're starting a BC-BU game. And it ended up making a huge difference because BC scored on the power play 24 seconds into the game. And that ended up deciding the game. It was a 1-0 game until a late empty netter. So that was the only non-empty net goal in the whole game, is on this game-opening power play off a bizarre penalty that, Bridget, you said you have seen in college before. I had never seen it. Pandolfo and Greg Brown, BC's coach, both said they had never seen it. So just an absolutely bizarre situation.
Yeah, I'd seen it a few years back in the ECAC. It wasn't a game I was doing, but it was a game that was, like, obviously when I used to work in the ECAC, like, people talk about it. We're all informed about it. A lot of times we get little notes from, officiating on certain things. And yeah, so I had seen a protocol violation before I knew what it was, for coming on the ice early, though. I think the one in the ECAC was like 30 seconds early. And this one was a much more like dramatic view of it because he was out there so much earlier. What I will say is, like, it's not the ref's fault for calling it because they had to call it, right? Like, I know people are like, well, why didn't they just give him a slide? Which I completely agree with. I think it should be a warning, right? But the way that it's written, it's not. I do feel bad for the kid. The only mistake he made in that whole game was before the game even started. And they get a power play goal right off the bat, not how you want to start your college career. He is such, like, an ace that BU pulled out of their sleeve that maybe 2 weeks ago, no one knew who he was. And then all of a sudden, it was on my broadcast last week, we brought him up for the first time because we heard he was enrolled, but he wasn't with the team yet. And then all of a sudden he's here, and he was phenomenal. He played an amazing game. He's a big kid, Russian. He goes by Mike, I think. Mike Yegorov. It's Mikhail Yegorov. He calls himself Mike, from what I understand. So totally Americanized it, makes my life easier as a broadcaster. But my thought is, like, this is on the person who opened the door, which is, there's a few people that could have stopped it along the way. Obviously, coaching staff, teammates who know the rule, I assume, know the rule. I thought they would. Because I knew it, and I assume they're educated on it, especially after it happened a few years ago. Which I'd have to go back and figure out what team that was, but it did happen maybe 3 seasons ago. And so the teammates maybe should have stopped him if they knew the rule. And been like, hey, where are you going? Down the tunnel, like, wait for us. But Either way, yeah, the person who controls the door, I don't know who they are, so I can't really say what their role was supposed to be or what they were told, but like, wouldn't you let the refs out first? That's the rule, is the refs first,
Well,
and then players
Yeah.
not until the clock is at a certain point. And yeah, so it's a tough situation because it's his fault, but it's not his fault because how is he supposed to know? And he was so eager to get out there, so excited. It was his first collegiate game. Like, it's not on him. His mindset was not thinking about a rule that he didn't even know. And I just hate that that's how it ended. And poor Scott had to sit there and watch BU get swept and probably sitting in his seat going, what would have happened if they didn't call that protocol violation and the power play goal doesn't go in?
But so why is the rule that it's delay of game? Like, I'm not understanding why. Like, in the NHL, if you shoot the puck over the glass, nobody likes that rule, but at least we're like, oh, okay, the puck's in the stand, so you can't play a delay game. But why is a goalie going on the ice before the refs? How is that delaying the game? Am I missing something?
It's not really delaying the game. I don't know how they like officially scored it, to be completely honest, but what they announced in the arena was that they announced it as bench minor on Boston University for a player taking the ice too early for warmups, which is that can't possibly be the official name of the penalty because that's way too long. But yeah.
It's just called a protocol violation, from what I understand.
Yeah.
Let me pull it up. It says team. It just says team bench minor. Yeah, that was it. Team bench minor.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think a pretty large Twitter account. I forget what media company it was. I think they said it was delay of game, so that's where I was getting that from. But perhaps.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay, so Bridget and Scott. Yeah, Scott, I apologize for the BU sweep, but I will say, I said this to you online. I want to give props to Terriers Nation and Eagles Nation. Like, both home arenas just completely showcased themselves really well. Scott, it sounds like Conte Forum was a little bit less sold out, but had more students, and Aganis was completely sold out. But
they were both they're both officially sellouts. BC did have like some empty seats lower down, sort of the important people seats. Whereas Aganis, it was I would say halfway through the first period, it was hard to find any empty seats. But BC has more students. Like, they just have a bigger student section. But both crowds were awesome. Like, we can do like the compare and contrast, but the ultimate takeaway is that it was two amazing atmospheres for college hockey, and BCBU always is, of course, but I think these last 2 years in particular have been above and beyond from even like 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I think the level that both programs have now consistently been at near the top of the country, like you forget that, like, there's been stretches where one or both have been a little off. Like, BC had, by their standards, like some down years prior to kind of this recent ramp up under Greg Brown. The end of Jerry York's time there, obviously he's a legend, but those weren't really great BC teams those last several years. BU under Albie O'Connell, who is a great assistant coach, but like BU kind of took a step back during those years when he was the head coach. So now you really have both programs kind of at or near the top of college hockey pretty consistently, with lots of blue chip recruits, future NHLers, and both fan bases, the student bodies and the alumni are just like energized at just extremely high levels.
Yeah, and I will say, I think there's something to do with the fact that the publicity of it has gone up, makes the quality of like the fan bases go up, because if you think about it, it's only like maybe 5 or 6 years ago that ESPN Plus became like really a thing in college hockey, and I'm sorry if you can hear Melvin. Like, I started out at
Melvin's louder than my mic.
Yes, he's losing his mind for some reason, probably the squirrel. But so I think 2017 is when I started like doing games on ESPN Plus, and since then it's become more and more like wide that you can watch college hockey, and now we broadcast a bunch of the games on Nesson as well, and because BC and BU have been good, like they get more publicity because it's just like adding on, and I think that helps with recruiting, and I think that helps with fans wanting to go watch those players that they've now seen on TV, but they're thinking, oh, well, that'd be cool to just spend a Friday night or Saturday night going actually down the street and watching some of these guys play.
I do want to round this conversation off with a Bruins note, but before I do, is the first round of the Beanpot matchups, are those set yet? Do we know if BC and BU are playing each other?
They are not. It's BU Harvard and BC Northeastern in the first round.
So a chance to play in the finals then. And Scott, what can we do to get BU to use those uniforms full time? Those red ones and those white ones with that terrier in the front. My goodness. Oh my God.
So I didn't think anything would ever, like, I've loved a lot of BU jerseys over the years. I didn't think anything would ever top like just the classic like red and white that they've had since 80s, 90s. They've had we call them like the candy cane ones that have more stripes that like they won the 2009 national title. And like, those are great. The ones that they wore this weekend, those might actually be my favorite. Those are excellent. And I think the jersey matchup on Saturday, I think was the best uniform for both teams. BC wore the alternate golds that have the flying eagle on the front. Like, I think those are probably my favorite BC jerseys. But yeah, those BU jerseys are awesome.
One BU BC jersey matchup we haven't had in the last couple of years during this high publicity rivalry has been BU in white and BC in maroon. Like every BC has worn their golds or their whites, which has led BU to wearing red both occasions. Like this past weekend,
Friday was white maroon at Aganis.
No, it wasn't. It was BC wore white and BU wore red. Yeah.
Did it? Am I misremembering?
Yeah, you are. But anyway,
you were there, bro.
There's a Bruins takeaway though. I do want to, while Scott's looking up my reaffirmation of my take.
Can I just say I was at PC and I'm scared of that mascot. So any mascot, anything is better than. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry because I work at PC. That fryer scares the crap out of me. Super creepy. But he can officiate your wedding if you want. I saw that advertised. He can be your officiant and stand in between you as you celebrate.
You know what scares the crap out of Bruins fans is Dean Letourneau's season.
So you're right. Yeah, BU wasn't red both.
So I wanted to get your guys' opinion on. Of course, I was right, Scott. I'm always right. Even when I'm wrong, I'm right. But Dean Letourneau, guys, let's talk about him. That because not at the center of this BU-BC rivalry is BC's fourth line center, but locally he's the Bruins' first round draft pick from this past draft, and not a ton to really report back positively. Like he makes a couple of plays here and there, but wouldn't say imposes his will at all. And when you have some players on both teams that are like, oh wow, they're going to be NHL studs, whether or not they've been drafted yet. For example, Ryan Leonard's been drafted by Washington. James Higgins has not been drafted, but he's projected to be the first overall pick. And then you have Cole Hudson and is it Cole Yzerman on?
Yeah.
So I mean, I think Cole Hudson was drafted by the Capitals too in a later round, and then Cole Yzerman was the Islanders' first round pick, and then you have Fowler in net for BC, who's a Canadians pick. But my point is, there's a lot of gonna be impact NHLers that were in these games, and can't really say that in his freshman year so far, Dean Letourneau's one of those people to this point. But it's a project with a capital P.
Yeah, it is. And he's so young still. And if Will Smith didn't leave at the end of last season, he probably wouldn't have been on the team this quick. They had a spot open for him and he came in, and he does not get a lot of playing time. Like you mentioned, maybe you tuned in and you were trying to find him. You probably were better off watching Yelvik and Gasso, who are two other Bruins picks that are on Boston College. And Don Sweeney, Scott tweeted this out. Don Sweeney and Adam McQuaid were both at the game. And I jokingly answered the group text that I think that means they're going to tank for Hagens at 1, but I know that's just a joke. So, But yeah, like so I broadcast the BC PC game 2 weeks ago, and he didn't see a lot of ice time until the game was kind of a little bit out of hand. So I think that he gets his minutes when it's like maybe late in the game and BC's already up big. Now, remember, he probably isn't getting as much experience because he's on the best team in the country. And maybe if he was on a team that had lesser talent up in front of him, he would have been able to find his footing in college hockey a little bit faster from getting more reps. But they're not in that game. Like they're teaching him in practice, but game time is not guaranteed on a BC team that is as good as it is. So yeah, he's still figuring out his body, I think. Like he's so tall and he's kind of lanky, maybe trying to put weight on and before he gets to the NHL too. But yeah, doesn't get a lot of ice time. I heard some people say like he's been getting more recently. I didn't see his minutes in the beginning of the season, so maybe that's true, but I would still say he's getting very few minutes.
Yeah, no, he played 6.5 minutes on Saturday, and I think a little over 8 on Friday. So the minutes aren't going up. Yeah, he shouldn't be in college hockey this year. He should be in the USHL. I think that would have done him a lot of good. Yeah, he is on the best team in the country, that they are deep, so that's part of it. But there was an opportunity there for him early in the season to move up in the lineup. He actually, I think the first couple times I saw him, he was on the third line. He's now on the fourth. A couple of weeks ago, it looked like he was actually going to be a healthy scratch one game until there was a late change and he wound up playing. BC's coach, Greg Brown, has a lot of good things to say about him. Says, he's practicing well and that he's come back from break, looking more assertive and energized. And, look, Greg Brown sees him a lot more than I do. So, I can't totally push back on that. I would just say, I don't see it showing up in games. Even in the limited minutes that he gets, to me, my biggest criticism of him right now, Letourneau, would be that he floats too much. I don't see him I don't see him closing quick on plays. I don't see him being aggressive. And I know he can do that because I saw a game against BC UMass Lowell game earlier this year where he had one awesome shift where he was in hard on the forecheck, forced a turnover, then circled back out high in the D zone, forced another turnover on a breakout attempt, helped create a scoring chance. And it was wow, if he does that more, great. Then that's an awesome sign. And then it feels like you just don't see that consistently. So we always knew Letourneau was going to be a project. This was a pick meant for 4 or 5 years down the road, not to help the Bruins in 1 or 2 years. We made that clear at the time that they picked him. So that remains the case. I do think the people are already saying he's a bust. I think that's too early. I think it's premature for that. But I will say, even knowing that he could have used a year in the USHL, even knowing BC's deep, I expected more this year. He hasn't scored a goal yet. He has 2 points in 22 games? Yeah, 2 points in 22 games, both assists. I regardless of everything else we've laid out, I definitely still expected a lot more than that.
I would just say, and it's totally fair to feel that way, Scott, and I'm not here to dissuade you. I would fall in that same category. But for you, me, and everybody, it is important to remember that, he's still only 18 years old and he's playing against kids that are primarily 20 to 22, 23. And look, it's no different than when a 14-year-old enters high school and he's playing against 18-year-olds. There's a big difference maturity-wise growing into your body and gaining confidence between 18 and 20, 21, 22. Now, of course, there are 18-year-olds in the past that have gone into the NHL, like Sidney Crosby and others. So, but not that I'm comparing.
Nathan had that season when he started. He was 17 last year.
James Higgins right now for BC, I believe, is the same situation. So, but those are exceptional exceptional talents, and like they are the anomalies. Most 18-year-olds, that's not the situation. Most 18-year-olds throughout the country, they're crossing their high school stage, getting their GED degree. Like it's still important to remember just how young he is, and when he has that size, there's probably an element of Bambi to him, where he's still trying to figure out how to use his body against these older players that are probably lifting more than him and stronger than him naturally. So I think I agree with everything that you're saying, Scott. Personally, if next year as a sophomore we're saying the same things, I will be far more disappointed, because I think there's an element of like you gain confidence year to year and you learn the pace of play more. So
in particular, bigger guys take longer to develop.
Yeah. So I'm really curious to see how his sophomore year goes, and I'm kind of taking this freshman year a bit with a grain of salt, but that's just where I am at this moment.
So that's unfortunate.
I was going to say, because all right, when you look at where he got picked in the draft, where the Bruins had their pick at number 25, and you see like, okay, so he's not getting a lot of ice time. He's not, he doesn't look like he's close to ready in his freshman season. Then you look at what Gabe Perreault has done in his freshman year.
That's what I was just going to say.
He was picked 23rd, which is very close to 25, and had a phenomenal freshman year and looks even better his sophomore year.
And he was 18. He was an 18-year-old freshman as well, who had 60 points in 36 games last year. Now he got to play in a line with Will Smith and Ryan Leonard, and came from a much better background, right? He was in the U.S. development program versus Canadian prep school. But still, like there's a huge middle ground between 60 points and 2 points. The other comparison I was going to bring up, because this is who Letourneau got compared to in terms of upside, was Tage Thompson. Tage Thompson went to college as an 18-year-old in 2015 at UConn, and I remember thinking he looked, gangly and a little Bambi-like, and all the things like Brian just mentioned, like trying to find himself. And yet Tage Thompson as a freshman still finished with 14 goals and 32 points in 36 games. So, like, if you just wanted to play that game, like, it doesn't look like he's going to be Tage Thompson. Now, again, lots of development time to go here. But it's not like 18-year-olds, like, always struggle to make an impact. Like, and Tage Thompson was 26th overall pick. So there's examples of 18-year-olds picked in the 20s who come in and produce.
Let me, and you're totally right. And, it's more of just a food for thought that I'm bringing up here. But, how about 18-year-olds that are drafted in the 50s? How about his teammate, Teddy Stiga? Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was drafted 55th overall this past draft, and he has 20 points, I think, on the season. So,
he's been awesome.
And had the golden goal in the World Juniors for Team USA. So, look, there are definitely examples, and I'm certainly not trying to make excuses for Dean Letourneau or the Bruins picking him. I'm just saying, it's important just to kind of look at all angles. But when you guys bring up the players you just mentioned, and I bring up Stiga there, I mean, that's the other side of the argument. So,
yeah, and again, and it all comes back to, like, Letourneau has had to make a bigger jump in terms of level of competition than all of those guys. Perreault, Stiga, Tage Thompson were all U.S. development program products, and that is as high a level of hockey as a 17-year-old can be playing. Like it's that, and like the OHL or WHL, QMJHL, like Canadian juniors. Dean Letourneau just wasn't at that level. He was at Canadian prep school and like basically skipped a full level, maybe two, to try to go to NCAA. So, I still think if he's playing any minutes down the stretch on a team chasing a national title, like, that's a valuable experience, and BC's coaching staff has proven themselves in terms of developing players. But it's just tough. Like, he's a level above where he should be at this point.
And that's been this episode of This Week in Hockey East. Thank you guys for tuning in. This is what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow when we record This Week in Hockey East.
A little practice for you.
Probably won't talk about Letourneau, but we will be talking about Yegorov, who, I don't know, if you're a BU fan, you should be excited because I think he's going to be really good. And I think he might be, maybe he's that little wild card that nobody knew was coming in the second semester. So anyway, I think that was a positive to take away. And we just spent half an hour talking about college hockey related subjects, but
I will say though, we haven't really spent as a podcast much time on Letourneau, and I think that this past weekend was a natural opportunity for us to kind of take a look at him. And so, yeah, we didn't plan on this first half hour of being Letourneau and BCBU, but we promise we'll get back to the here and now of the Bruins as well. But I think there's time for all of it if we're talking about the whole organization. Any final thoughts on that before we move on to the soup du jour and the Bruins current playoff?
No, yeah, let's get to Bruins.
All right, let's do it. Everybody's pulling their hair out. Come on, talk about the Bruins.
Don't worry, I'll timestamp it. People will be able to skip whatever they don't.
There you go. So right now, Bridget and Scott, we talked about the win over the Avalanche off the top, and right now as it stands, the Bruins are in possession of the first wild card position if we're going off of points. If we're going off points percentage, they would be the first team outside the playoff picture. Tampa Bay and Columbus would be ahead of them. Actually, Tampa Bay might even be ahead of it would actually technically on points percentage be Ottawa and Columbus. Tampa Bay would be in the Atlantic. But so here we are. I mean, the Bruins are in a playoff race. We have, what seems to be a fan base that wakes up on a different side of the bed each day. What's best for this team? What's, as it pertains to the season. And that Colorado game was just kind of a perfect example of why this Bruins team is so polarizing and tough to figure out in a sense, because they get the 2 points, but they're chasing the game for, let's call it 85% of the game, 80% of the game. And you're watching the game and you're like, okay, that's great. They got the 2 points, but is it great? Because they're playing one of the better teams and they were chasing them. So like, what is this team?
Yeah, like the Bruins didn't have a single high danger chance through 2 periods, which is kind of crazy. And they did give up several, that Drouin, McKinnon, Necas line, which, by the way, like we haven't even gotten to yet, but Colorado made an absolutely blockbuster trade Friday night, sending Mikko Rantanen to Carolina. Carolina also gets Taylor Hall from Chicago, and Colorado ends up with Marty Necas, Jack Drury, and 2 draft picks, a second and a fourth. Necas and Drury play Saturday afternoon. I know Necas was in New York with Carolina, so that was an easy trip. Obviously, Drury was as well. So, so they plugged them right in, throw Necas on a line with McKinnon, and like, that line especially had possession like all game. It felt like they were in the Bruins zone. But I did think, like, if we're going to give the Bruins some credit, they did do a pretty solid job of keeping a lot of that possession to the outside. Now, I also think you pretty clearly saw McKinnon and Necas not having the chemistry to like find that last pass that like unlocks a grade A chance. So I do think the Bruins also benefited from that a little bit. They just like straight up missed each other on some passes. But yeah, to the Bruins' credit, they hang around, and then they get a big penalty kill late in the second that carries over 9 seconds to start the third, and then score right after that when your top line jumps on the ice. So you're right. It's like, it's a game you look at and you're like, that's a big win, and that's 2 big wins in a row, Ottawa and Colorado. And yet you feel like that's not, the way they played is not really sustainable in terms of having success. It's sort of similar to the Florida and Tampa wins a couple weeks ago, where you get the win and ultimately in the middle of a playoff race, like that's all that really matters. But you get badly outshot. You're in your own zone a lot. And it's like, hard to imagine winning a playoff series that way, but it's been good enough in some of these games recently.
Bridget and Scott, real quick, not to derail the conversation, but about because I'm gonna respond directly to what you said, Scott. But about 15, 20 minutes ago, I felt some rattling beneath my feet, and I just there's a train track next to the office that I'm recording, and I thought that maybe it was something to do with that. And now my phone is getting a bunch of texts from people saying, "Did anybody else feel an earthquake?" So did you guys feel anything, or?
I did not. So I'm up. I see people like tweeting about this. I'm up in Lowell. I did not feel anything.
Okay. I'm down in Attleboro. I also did not feel anything. So was this the Boston area, like specifically?
Well, I'm in Nashua at the moment, but people that were texting me are in this southern New Hampshire, northern Mass area, but then there were some people on the North Shore that were texting me as well. I'm not sure, but I thought it was just something in the area, but that's crazy. Okay. Anyway, so back to what you were talking about, Scott. Yeah, look. I watched that game, and the first thing that comes to mind is, it's a big 2 points depending on who you're asking, right? And my perfect scenario for the Bruins would be to make the playoffs, but in the process, maybe finding a way to sell a piece or two that's not going to be long for Boston, and then you still make the playoffs somehow, some way. I think that's the most responsible approach. But I watched that game, and I'm like, see, this is what I don't want to happen. You get the team clearly now. Granted, they're without McAvoy and they're without Hampus Lindholm, and I don't want to gloss over that because it's their top 2 defensemen. But you watch how they just get completely dominated over the course of a game against a really good team, and you're like, because they're not at that level. We saw the Oilers skate circles around the Bruins. We see this with this Bruins team, and my biggest fear is that you're going to have Cam Neely and Don Sweeney who are coaching for today, because I can't blame them. Their coach, Sweeney in particular, they're managing for today. Sweeney in particular, like, if I'm him, I want to be a buyer at the deadline. I want to make the playoffs. I want my job to be secure. How is your job secure as Don Sweeney? The best way to secure your job is to make the playoffs again. Like, I get it, his position. But my biggest fear is that this management group is going to stand pat, not sell away any pieces, and then actually end up missing the playoffs. And now you don't get playoffs, and you haven't helped your future at all. And if they can find a way to make the playoffs and still, make some appropriate moves for the future, then I think that's the best of both worlds. But I just fear that a game like that, it just helps this management group be like, yeah, we got 4 points in the last 2 games. Like, we should be buying. It's like, no, you really shouldn't be. Like, if you want to use, like, again, last episode we talked about JT Miller and barring, poaching somebody else's top line center, like, the Bruins really shouldn't.
The Sidney Crosby rumors.
Yeah. Like, barring something like that, which is, if that happens, sure, I'll change my opinion on some things, but I can't operate under that assumption. This team shouldn't be buying, maybe outside of maybe, like, if you want to throw a mid-round pick at a team for a middle 6 forward, then go for it. But, that's just my fear. And, somebody like Morgan Geekie to bridge his opening shift, there's reasons to sell high on him, and there's reasons to think that he's part of the future. Someone like Trent Frederick, I would say, has not helped that argument. He should be somebody that, regardless if they make the playoffs or not, they probably should be moving on from, because you should probably get something for him, especially if you don't see yourselves re-signing him. So again, like, this team, it's just I know what they should do regardless of their 2 points against Colorado, but the management group, I don't have faith that they will do what's best for the team, and also what could still get them to their goal this year, which is making the playoffs.
Yeah, and also, like, if you look at the Rantanen deal, part of that was because he's on an expiring contract, and they're trying to get something for him while they can.
Only one of the best players in the league for the last 7-8 years.
Yeah, so, like, you're trying to get something for someone. Return's not going to be like that for Frederick, but or for Geekie, even though he's playing on your top line. He's a top line guy now. But yeah, and just to go back to what Brian said about the earthquake, I just looked it up. People are saying it was off the coast of Maine. And so that's why people, like, coastally in northern Mass and New Hampshire are feeling it. Razor said he felt it. That's where I saw this. But anyway, I hope everybody's okay. I don't think it did any sort of destruction. It said 4.1. I don't know. But Anyway,
Well, I felt it, and I'm 40 plus miles from the coastline. So yeah.
So, but Scott, did you have something to say about that?
No. Keep going. I was gonna jump in on Rantanen, but I'll let you can finish.
Oh, you can talk about Rantanen. I was gonna go back to Bruins.
Yeah, like so the Rantanen trade, it's like it does feel like this really kind of jumpstarts trade deadline season. Like there's been rumors for a while. I think everyone's been expecting a JT Miller trade for a while, and Carolina was one of the teams in on Miller. So that's if we do think the Bruins at all are like in those discussions, that's one team out now. But yeah, it's such a fascinating trade. Like you just don't see, like Colorado's in the middle of their cup window. Even though I know right now, I think they're a wild card team, not, they're not super high up in the standings. Like you just don't see teams make that kind of trade. But obviously they know what he's asking for, and by all reports, it's 13, 14 million a year. And they knew they weren't going to be able to give it to him. Like you have McKinnon on a huge contract. Makar is actually affordable right now, but is going to be on a huge contract when his current deal is up. Obviously they just felt like I was at the press conference with the general manager Saturday before the game, and he mentioned, they weren't deep enough, and part of this trade was to help address depth by like getting Jack Drury, who they envision as the third line center. And it's like, yeah, but you don't trade Mikko Rantanen to improve your depth. Like you would rather just have Mikko Rantanen. But yeah, it's
the speculation of they move out Rantanen, but like Frank Saravalli tweeted out that wasn't the biggest move he heard was on the table. And I love the speculation of like, oh my God, they're gonna get Crosby and McKinnon together, get the band together over there, because those guys are obviously the best of friends, and I think we're at each other's cup celebrations and everything. And Marchand is friends with them too. They all work out in the off season, but yeah, I doubt Crosby's gonna end up in Colorado.
Yeah, but I know Paul Bizanet was trying to push that as well, which is one of those things where like you never know if Biz is actually hearing something or just trying to start stuff. But yeah, I mean those rumors were like loud, like Friday night and then even Saturday. Like people at the Bruins game were talking about it. Not like any officials or like anyone involved who would really know. But then even at like the BUBC game, I had people ask me like, is Crosby getting traded too? I'm like, I can't possibly imagine it. And then like finally you got like your Elliot Friedman, kind of pouring some cold water on it all. But yeah, that was like a fun 24 hours.
Well, Kevin Weeks is usually pretty good with, some of his.
And he tweeted, tweeted like the skyline of Pittsburgh or whatever
with the eyes emoji, and then Ryan Callahan, who is close with Weeksy, like chimed in as well, and so who really knows? But Scott, to tie it back to the Bruins, I mean, you mentioned JT Miller, and I mentioned him a few minutes ago, but yeah, Elliot Friedman mentioned on a recent 32 Thoughts podcast that JT Miller has to approve wherever he's traded to, and it's Friedman's understanding that JT Miller's preference is Eastern US. So that's, for the most part, that's the Eastern Conference. And you look at the Eastern Conference and or a portion of the Eastern Conference, and you look at the teams the cities that could be, and what teams on that relatively smaller list need a number one center, have the assets, have the appetite for it. And it really does boil down to like the Rangers, the Bruins, the Hurricanes. But then, as you mentioned, the Hurricanes, they had that huge splash with the Rantanen trade. And, it just feels like, not that they can't still acquire Miller, but, when Natchez is part of the deal, you would think that he would be utilized for a deal like one of the centers in Vancouver. So now now it's like, okay, now maybe Carolina is one of those teams that could have been a destination for a Miller or a Pettersson, and now maybe they're not, and maybe now it's like down to like potentially the Rangers and the Bruins or somebody that I'm not thinking of in the Eastern US.
Well, the Devils have been linked as well, so I would throw them in there.
Okay.
And by the way, which Elias Pettersson are we talking about here?
The center.
Now.
Yeah, the center. I saw
guys with the same name.
Yeah, there were some funny videos floating around on Twitter of like JT Miller's reaction, realizing that there's two of them now.
That's pretty good. And then, of course, the other time that happened was two Sebastian Ahos, which is, I feel like.
Well, but they only played against each other though, never on the same team.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think it was like the first time since the 90s. I think someone mentioned.
Yeah. So I just wanted to button up something real quick on Bridget's opening shift, which was Morgan Geekie, because I was talking about the difference between Frederic and Geekie and like the willingness for the Bruins to maybe trade one of them. And here's what I would say. One of those players, both of those players had career highs in points last year. One of those players is actually trending to surpass that. That's Morgan Geekie. So there's progress there. There's a player that they continue to trend upwards. Right now, despite his slow start to the season, Morgan Geekie has 15 goals, 11 assists, 26 points, and is now on pace for 44 points in 77 games. Last year, he had 39 points in 76 games. So when you're trying to figure out, can this player be part of the solution and be part of the future, or should we move on from them? Morgan Geekie has been showing the Bruins the last 2 years, more so than Frederic, that he's a player that is continuing to trend upwards. Now, again, what's due to playing with David Pastrnak? Probably a lot, but let's give Morgan Geekie credit too. When he was in Seattle, I think his points per 60 were actually pretty good in Seattle as a fourth liner. So, when you're again, I'm skeptical that Don Sweeney is going to sell anything. But if you're the Bruins and you're trying to identify who are some players that we can move on from and re-sign, with still an eye towards making the playoffs this year, I think the case is to be had. Morgan Geekie could be part of the future more so than Trent Frederic, because Trent Frederic's numbers aren't there, and his consistency hasn't been there, despite having a pretty good last month of the season when he's been in the lineup.
Yeah, and Geekie has shown an ability to move up in the lineup, and we always talk about like Trent Frederic's versatility, and we wondered, is this a player who can move up into the top six, whether that's full time or even just pinch hitting here and there? And obviously, at the level he's played this year, you can't do that. You can't put him in your top six, so he's kind of pigeonholed as a bottom six forward right now. Whereas Geekie has shown the ability to move up and down and has produced when he's been on a top line with Pastrnak and Zacha. So yeah, like that absolutely makes him more it makes him more valuable to you, and it also makes him more valuable to potential suitors on the trade market. Ultimately, like Morgan Geekie has obviously helped himself make more money, and he's really helped the Bruins. He's helped the Bruins now in the present get some wins and score some big goals here recently. But he's also helped them regardless of which path they choose going forward. Because either you keep him and you feel pretty good about him being, whether it is staying on a line with Pastrnak, who, those two have clearly developed some chemistry, which should not be ignored or brushed away at all. Like, I know we all think like, oh, you just put anyone with Pastrnak and they produce, but that's not true. Like, Elias Lindholm played with Pastrnak earlier this season and didn't produce. You do have to find chemistry, and right now those guys have it, and like there's something to be said for that. Or if you do go the retool route and you look at trading Geekie, he's also helped you because now you're going to get more in return if that's ultimately the path you choose.
Yeah, I guess the question I'll ask both of you is, at this point, are you in the sell high camp or are you in the re-sign camp?
On Geekie in particular?
Yeah.
It really depends for me if the Bruins are willing to like, if I would say re-sign. I'm probably in the re-sign camp, but that's kind of with me assuming that they're willing to part with Trent Frederick at the deadline. Like I don't want them to just like re-sign Geekie and then like lose everybody else. Like I want them to have some forward thinking. If you're gonna re-sign Geekie, great. Make sure it's at the right dollar value, right? AAV. Also, to Scott's point last episode, weighing that against a potential return. So without knowing, those intangibles, it's tough to really give an answer. But if the return's not good enough and the contract is a future contract is good enough, then I would resign him. But I'd want them to do that, being like, all right, we know Geekie can play up and down the lineup to the points you guys have made. We know Mark Kaslick, we just re-signed, can bring a lot of what Trent Frederick has brought. We have players. Frederick is now expendable. I mean, he already was, but I'd rather them sign Geekie, but knowing maybe we're going to trade Frederick or something at the deadline. Like I want to see a little bit of like the Bruins just being proactive and showing me that they're actually like thinking steps ahead. The Bruins management oftentimes just seems very reactionary. Like, what do we need? Let's get it. Or like show me some critical forward thinking. But to answer your question, Bridget, if they handle things appropriately and the market isn't there for Geekie and they can get him to get a good contract, I'd like to re-sign him because I think he's a fine guy to have in your middle six. But without knowing details, it's tough to give a complete answer.
So I would also lean towards re-sign because in addition to the production, I like the way he's playing. Like he's forechecking well. He's getting to the front of the net. Like he's playing the style that the Bruins want to play, that they most of the season have not had enough forwards playing that way. It's a way that I think works in the playoffs. Like it's how you have to win it's how you have to play to win in the postseason. So I would also lean towards a re-sign. I was trying to think of numbers earlier this morning, and this is not me like reporting anything that's on the table. This is me just guessing, but like say the deal, right? Say you could get this done right now. Like, would you give Geekie 4 years, $4 million a year? Yeah. He's on a 2-year, $2 million deal right now. So you double the years, double the money.
I say yes.
I don't know if I would do that. I don't know. I would say
first line.
He's better in first line, but that's an indictment on the depth or lack thereof of the team. To Scott's point last episode, I promise you, no matter how much chemistry Pastrnak and Geekie have in this moment, the Bruins are not looking at Morgan Geekie as a future first-line center to play with David Pastrnak. Like, it might be a good trick to have in your back pocket if need be, if somebody gets hurt. But the Bruins...
Yeah, but they're not paying him like that, though. $4 million, you're not paying a guy like you need to pay a first-line center. No, like, that's a complimentary price.
No, but again, look, if you're going to sign him for $4 million, I want to know that he can produce the way he has when he's not playing with one of the best players in the world. Like, some of the intangibles he's bringing right now, which is the physicality, going to the net, doing the little things right. I love that, and he can do that no matter who his line mates are. I look, has he earned a doubling contract? Again, you'd have to look at the rest of your lineup and what are you trying to bring in? Can you afford him at $4 million? I think I would feel more comfortable at 3.5 maybe. But
but
three, 3.5.
Like I wonder. Yeah, I just wonder if you're already kind of passing the window where he signs for under 4. Like as I said earlier, his value is only going up. So say 3 or 3.5 was on the table at some point. Morgan Geekie and his agent might be sitting there going look at how he's producing. Why would we take something that might have been there, a month ago when the number's only going up right now?
Well, he's on pace for 44 points, and he's playing with Pastrnak, and that's where a lot of those points have came from. So,
since December 4th, he is tied for 8th in the NHL in goals.
Yeah, I just can't. First of all, so here's a couple of questions, right? What is a 40 to 45 point middle six forward worth. If you think it's $4 million and that's fair market value, then you know what? I'm not going to sit here and argue over $500,000 one way or the other. But my biggest question is he a 40 to 45 point guy if he's playing with Matt Patra or you know what I mean? That I don't know that answer, and so I'm hesitant to give him $4 million unless I can see that he can produce as a line driver.
Yeah, and that's totally fair, and like that's why this is such an interesting case because like we all like the way he's playing and finishing chances and checking and all of it, but you're right, like you can't ignore the fact that it's David Pastrnak creating a lot of these chances. Like that is one of that's the guy who leads the NHL in points in the month of January, who's playing like who we know can be one of the best players in the world and now is finally playing like it this season. So all extremely fair points. The one last thing I would point out is the Bruins do also have, not that this is ideal, but they do also have the option of playing hardball. Like he's a restricted free agent, so there is team control there where like you can take this into the summer. You don't have to worry about him walking as an unrestricted free agent. Again, that's not ideal, but it is an option.
And I didn't get a chance to answer this yet, so I'm going to answer. I think it'll be unanimous that I think resign over sell high. Sure, there's plenty of other people with the opinion that get something for him now. Those are probably also the people with the opinion of maybe that you don't see him in the future, or maybe you think it's time to big time retool and get rid of a guy on an expiring every guy on an expiring contract, which I don't think is necessarily the best way to go about it. But so I say resign. I say even if it is $4 million, just looking at the contracts that are on the team already, that's less than Charlie Coyle makes. That's less than Pavel Zacha makes. Like that's less than some guys that are producing less than him. And I still don't think that's a super high contract, especially with the cap expected to go up. And I also think that the trade value might not necessarily be as high as people think. It's driving up his number probably for a contract, but I don't know if it's necessarily super enticing in a trade because of the Pastrnak thing and because I feel like it's one of those cases where it's such a specific connection and such specific chemistry with one player that you're not sure if it can be replicated. And you don't know necessarily what the numbers would look like if you needed to plug him in on your third line. Like you're not getting what the Bruins would be trying to sell him for with the production that he's having right now. So it would be, I think the return would be less than people think because the risk on the other side is trying to convince the Bruins, like, hey, we might need him as a third liner. He's not going to be playing with a Pastrnak-like guy. His numbers are not going to be that in like the role that we need him in. And also maybe it's specifically Pasta that he's good with, because I've said this before, like those two have a similar mindset, like similar ways of thinking the game. Maybe other stars that you want to put him with or other players you want to put him with don't think it the same way and it doesn't look the same. And look back what he was before the Bruins. Like there's certain things that I think bring the trade value not quite as high as what you would think just based on looking at production alone.
Yeah, and like there's just factors that we just don't know, like that Don Sweeney does, right? Don Sweeney right now knows is Morgan Geekie's camp asking for 5 or 4.5. Like if that's the case, then I'm selling him at the deadline. Like I'm not if come March that you're that far away with the player, I don't want him to go for nothing. Get something for him. But if things are reasonable right now that are being discussed and they're not far away, like I just don't know these details. But what I can tell you is that Morgan Geekie deserves all the credit in the world for the fact that he has been finishing checks, going to the net, playing the right way, finding those open areas, and finishing on the opportunities that David Pastrnak has put right on a platter. But that last part that I said cannot be overlooked. If you go back and look at, a lot of Morgan Geekie's goals, in particular, the last, couple of weeks, it's David Pastrnak, like dancing around multiple defenders and eyes in the back of his head, finding Geekie in the slot, finding Geekie backdoor. And Geekie deserves credit for finishing. No doubt about it. But just because you score a goal doesn't mean that you are the reason that the puck went into the net for the majority of it. Like David Pastrnak has been 90% of the reason that Morgan Geekie's goals have happened.
And Pasta draws the defenders, and
right.
Pasta being on a line with Pasta automatically means you're getting more minutes. So like you have more of a chance to impact the score sheet and stuff like that.
Yeah. So a couple things here. So one, just to reiterate, like losing him for nothing is not in play this year. Like that can't happen until summer 26 anyways.
Can you expound upon that, Scott? Because I'm a little bit there myself.
Because he's a restricted free agent. So he doesn't have the option to go wherever he wants.
But if the Bruins and he don't come to a contract agreement at the end of the season,
arbitration.
But
like even if someone offer sheets him, then you get draft pick compensation. So
I'm a little bit unclear. So as an RFA, the Bruins get first offer rights, correct?
And they get all offer rights. He can't. I mean, he can negotiate with someone for an offer sheet if him and the Bruins don't reach a deal, but then the Bruins either match or get draft picks.
Okay, so all right, so that's just my misunderstanding of the situation. So I thought that RFAs, like the team had, X amount of time to get them a contract done throughout the summer, and then there was a certain point later in the summer where, okay, no agreement, then hit the open market. So that's not the case.
No, like if you think about Swayman, like Swayman was never. He was never going to turn into an unrestricted free agent. Like he could have sat out the year, but then he just doesn't get paid. Like he can't go sign somewhere else.
Okay. That's a good distinction. Thanks for the clarification on that. And maybe there's a lot of people that didn't know that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is good. Like, yeah, restricted free agency can be confusing. Second thing I would say on the return, who would you rather have right now? Morgan Geekie or Taylor Hall?
Morgan Geekie, probably. Yeah,
I would.
I've always been high on Taylor Hall though, so that was a hard answer.
So Taylor Hall just got traded for an early third-round pick. Now we know it's going to be an early third because Chicago got their own pick back from Carolina, and Chicago sucks. So that's going to be a high third-round pick. And the consensus is Chicago didn't get enough for him. So I would say, Morgan Geekie is younger, is producing more this season, and has a better contract, including team control beyond this year. So, yeah, he should and will go for more than Taylor Hall. So, like the bare minimum is a second-round pick. I think like the possibility is there to get like a first-round pick plus. In which case, like I'm open to trading him again. Like I said, I lean resign. Obviously, all depends on the price of the contract. It depends on trade offers. But I do think the possibility is there for you to get like Bridget. You said like you think he'd go for less than maybe people think, and I guess it all depends on what maybe people expect. But I actually think the possibility is there for him to go for more. Like just because I don't like there aren't a ton of clear sellers this season, so. I think there is a chance like this ends up being a seller's market and prices are really high.
And if a second round pick could always be used in a package for a grander trade, like it's if you're somebody out there who says second, third round picks or whatever, like those things, they're not very valuable. First of all, it's not true because there's a lot of examples in Bruins history and league history of second rounders being franchise players, but you can also use those to, package in if you have bigger plans or something. And real quick, Bridget, before you get to what you were going to say, I just want to clarify on this episode while we're still here, seeing reports at practice that Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm are practicing in regular practice jerseys, which would indicate that there is contact allowed on them. And maybe you see them as early as the Buffalo game. Maybe not, but it sounds like they are very, very close, and a return for them is imminent.
Yeah, so Fluto has them listed as like the fourth pairing. So maybe that suggests like they're still not game ready, but either way, very encouraging.
Yeah, that is. I mean, I don't even need to finish my thought on Geekie because I think maybe we should spend a little time on that, like news, because obviously Lindholm's been out for so long, and you're hoping that getting your top D pair back gets you back in firmer footing to make this push for that, the playoff spot that you want. And I also heard the comments from Zadorov the other day where he said something like, "Oh, the media has done a good job of writing us off," and it's like, and I want to play playoff hockey. We're going to play playoff hockey this year. It's like that's kind of how he is too. Like, he's very fiery and believes that this is a playoff team. I think a lot of them, he's vocal about it. And when you get McAvoy and Lindholm back, it gives you a better chance for sure. And I also saw this, what I think is a dumb article the other day about how, McAvoy is not even on either of their power play units right now. I'm like, McAvoy is not playing. Someone wrote that McAvoy is like off their power play. I'm like, McAvoy hasn't played since it was one of those ESPN power ranking things. I was like, he's just not playing right now. So what?
There's an argument for him to not be on the power play when he does return.
I know there is, but the article said, he's not on their power play. It's like, he's not even in a contact jersey. Like now he is. But
just quickly, because I know Scott has to go in a few minutes, but I think Zadorov is a very fun personality, and I think the league should have more like him. But I mean that. And I know he's probably kind of tongue in cheek, but there's some seriousness there when he calls out the media for what did he say, Bridget? What exactly did he say?
I think writing us off. I think was his term.
Writing us off. So it's like, well, first of all, people are just they're just doing their jobs and they're assessing. Your team, Nikita, is a bottom third team in almost every team metric, and you're on points percentage outside the playoffs. So people are just reporting on how you guys are playing. If you don't like that, then be a better team. I just the vilifying of media sometimes is warranted, but other times it's just people doing their jobs and reacting to what the product has been.
And also it's
eye test and analytics as well.
It's part of a larger conversation that the fan base is having. It's not just media is talking about it.
How about his team president?
Yeah.
His team president said, we got to see how we do in the next month. We'll be buyers or sellers, essentially.
Yeah. How about the fans who are chanting to fire the general manager? Or I see a lot more from fans saying this team should sell or they have no chance than even media. If you include sports radio, then that's obviously a loud voice that I think has written this team off. But when I write or tweet or say on here that I'm not 100% convinced on either path yet, and I think there's still time to figure it out. I get a bunch of responses from people being they don't have any chance. What is there left to decide? They need to retool or rebuild or sell or whatever. I think there's a lot more fans that are convinced that the season's going nowhere than even media, honestly.
Yeah, and if you're talking about media writers that are at every game, then you're which is who he's speaking to directly. That's not the group of people that's on the radio screaming about some crazy opinion, because that's not our job. That's the on-air people's job. Most of the people in that room are not writing controversial things, from what I understand. If anything, it's based off numbers. There's, we're writing articles hey, let's weigh these things, but it's not writing anybody.
Yeah. And all that said, but before I log off, overall, I liked those comments from Zadorov. Because we really haven't heard anyone else, not even necessarily that part, but I don't plan on missing the playoffs. I'm here to play playoff hockey. Just because we really haven't heard anyone else kind of say that. We've heard guys talk about, we know what's in front of us. We know the work we have to do, and take sort of more measured comments. I actually liked hearing Zadorov say that and be you guys can write whatever you want, but like, no, I don't plan on missing the playoffs. Like, like regardless of what you think of his play, which can still, I think has gotten better, could definitely still be better. I think if you're a fan, like that's what you want to hear.
All right, that'll do it for us. Bridget, Scott, thank you. Thank you all for listening. Bruins are playing Tuesday against the Sabres, Thursday against the Jets, and then Saturday against the Rangers. So we will have our normal Monday, Wednesday, Friday release this week. So thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.